The strange thing wasn't that the waitress stayed calm during the robbery. It was that she seemed to know it was coming. Rain streaked down the floor-to-ceiling windows of Le Noir like silver threads melting across glass, while Manhattan glowed cold and distant 30 floors below. Inside the restaurant, everything shimmered with quiet luxury. Crystal chandeliers reflected against polished marble floors. Soft violin music drifted through the air. Expensive watches flashed beneath warm golden light as the city's wealthiest people leaned over whispered conversations and $1,000 dinners. Claire Whitmore moved silently between the tables, carrying a silver tray balanced effortlessly against one hand. At first glance, she looked forgettable. Just another waitress in a fitted black uniform with her blonde hair tied neatly behind her neck. But there was something unusual about the way she watched a room. Calm eyes, precise movements, like someone measuring distances nobody else noticed. Table 6 needs another bottle, another server whispered while rushing past her. Claire nodded once. No wasted motion, no wasted words. Near the center window sat Daniel Mercer, billionaire founder of Mercer Dynamics, a man famous for buying companies the same way other people ordered coffee. Fast, emotionless, efficient. At 41, Daniel carried success like armor. Tailored charcoal suit, platinum watch, expression permanently unreadable. 2 attorneys sat across from him reviewing documents connected to a deal rumored to be worth nearly $900 million. Daniel barely looked up while signing another page. People in restaurants usually stared at him, tried to impress him. Claire didn't either. She simply approached the table and refilled his water without interrupting the conversation. But before walking away, she quietly said, "You may want to move your guests away from the north exit tonight." Daniel finally looked up. Her voice wasn't fearful. It was certain. "Excuse me?" he asked. Claire adjusted the water glass slightly. The security camera above that hallway stopped working 11 minutes ago. One of the attorneys frowned. "Shouldn't security handle that?" Claire gave a small polite smile. "They should." Then she walked away before anyone could ask another question. Daniel watched her disappear between the tables. Strange girl. He returned to the contract in front of him, but something about her tone lingered in the back of his mind. Around the restaurant, conversations continued beneath soft jazz and clinking crystal. A couple laughed near the piano. A senator raised a champagne glass beside the fireplace. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the Hudson River. Then the front door opened. 3 men stepped inside wearing dark jackets damp from the rain. Most people wouldn't have noticed them. Claire did immediately. Her eyes lifted from the tray in her hands and locked onto the tallest man near the entrance. Military-style boots. Gloves despite the warm interior. One hand hidden inside his coat pocket. The men didn't look at the menu. They looked at the exits. Claire slowly set the tray down beside the bar. Across the room, Daniel noticed something change in her expression for the first time all night. Not fear. Recognition. Claire's fingers moved quietly beneath the counter until they touched a hidden alarm button taped underneath the polished wood. At that exact moment, the violin music stopped. One of the men turned the lock on the front door. Another calmly flipped the sign from open to closed. And suddenly, the entire atmosphere inside Le Noir changed. The click of the lock sounded louder than the thunder outside. At first, nobody reacted. Wealthy people in places like Le Noir were used to privacy. Used to doors closing behind them, used to security. But Claire Whitmore felt the shift instantly. The air changed. Heavy, tight, dangerous in a way most people only recognize too late. One of the men pulled the curtains across the front windows while another calmly walked toward the center of the dining room. No rushing, no shouting. That was what unsettled Claire most. Experienced men never needed to panic. Daniel Mercer slowly lowered the pen in his hand as conversations around the restaurant began fading one by one. A senator near the fireplace stopped mid-sentence. A woman in diamonds tightened her grip around a wine glass. Somewhere in the kitchen, a plate shattered against the floor. Then the tallest man finally spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain calm and nobody gets hurt." His voice was controlled, professional almost. The violinist lowered her instrument with trembling hands. One of Daniel's attorneys immediately reached for his phone beneath the table. Claire saw it before anyone else did. "Do not," she said sharply. Her voice cut through the silence so suddenly that even Daniel looked at her. The attorney froze. A split second later, the robber nearest the bar turned directly toward their table. Phones stay visible, he warned calmly. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked back toward Claire. She had not guessed. She had anticipated. Across the room, guests slowly began placing watches, jewelry, and phones onto white tablecloths while servers stood frozen beside half-finished meals. Nobody screamed. Somehow that made everything feel worse. Fear settled quietly instead. Claire stepped away from the bar carrying an untouched bottle of sparkling water like she was still working a normal shift. One of the younger robbers glanced at her with confusion. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Keeping people calm," Claire answered softly. Her heartbeat remained steady. Years ago, that would not have surprised her. Now it did. She moved carefully between tables, whispering to guests to stay seated and avoid sudden movements. A frightened older woman near the piano struggled to breathe through rising panic. Claire crouched beside her immediately. "Look at me," she whispered gently. "Slow breath in. Slow breath out. You are going to be okay." Daniel watched the interaction from across the room. Most people in danger revealed who they truly were. Some became selfish. Others collapsed completely. Claire became quieter, sharper somehow, like pressure turned her into steel. Near the entrance, one robber suddenly approached Daniel's table holding a tablet in his hand. "Mr. Mercer," he said calmly, "you are going to authorize a wire transfer tonight." One of Daniel's attorneys stood abruptly. "You cannot seriously think. Sit down." The robber did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The attorney slowly lowered himself back into the chair. Daniel leaned back slightly, studying the man in front of him with cold focus. "This is not random," he said. "You came here for me." The robber smiled faintly. "Smart man." Across the room, Claire's eyes flickered toward the emergency hallway near the kitchen. Still dark, still unguarded, but not for long. One of the robbers began moving toward it. Claire quietly reached for a silver serving tray beside the bar, her fingers steady against the polished metal. Daniel noticed that too. And for the first time since the nightmare began, the billionaire felt something unexpected. Not fear for himself. Fear that the calm waitress standing 20 feet away was about to do something dangerous. Claire Whitmore tightened her fingers around the silver serving tray while the storm outside rattled the massive windows of Le Noir. The sound almost blended with the soft trembling spreading through the restaurant. Crystal glasses sat abandoned beside untouched meals. Expensive phones covered the tables like surrendered pieces in a game nobody wanted to play. Near the entrance, the tallest robber kept his eyes fixed on Daniel Mercer while rainwater dripped slowly from the edge of his dark coat onto the marble floor. "You are going to open the account," he said calmly. "And you are going to do it now." Daniel leaned back in his chair with controlled stillness, though his pulse had begun to sharpen beneath the surface. He had spent 20 years negotiating hostile takeovers and billion-dollar acquisitions. But this felt different. Personal. Planned. "You are assuming I keep access to private accounts on my phone," Daniel replied evenly. "You are assuming we did not prepare for that," the robber answered. Across the room, Claire slowly scanned the dining area again. 3 men. One near the front entrance. One monitoring the guests. One controlling Daniel. No random movement. No nervous pacing. These men had rehearsed. The younger robber near the piano suddenly noticed a busboy trying to slip toward the kitchen hallway. "Hey!" His voice snapped across the room instantly. The teenager froze. He could not have been older than 17. "I was just trying to help," the busboy whispered shakily. "Get back." The robber pointed toward the dining room without raising his voice. The boy stumbled backward, breathing hard. Claire stepped forward before fear could spread further. "He is just a kid," she said calmly. The younger robber glanced at her. "And you are just a waitress." "Tonight that might be useful," Claire replied quietly. Something flickered across the man's face. Confusion maybe. Most people either begged or stayed silent in situations like this. Claire did neither. Daniel watched her carefully now. Every movement she made felt deliberate. Even the way she positioned herself slightly between the robbers and the terrified staff seemed calculated. Then Daniel noticed something else. Claire kept looking toward reflective surfaces. Wine glasses, mirrors, window panels. She was tracking angles without turning her head, like someone trained never to lose sight of a threat. One of Daniel's attorneys leaned closer to him and whispered under his breath, "Who is she?" Daniel did not answer, because suddenly he wanted to know the same thing. Near the fireplace, an older guest began shaking uncontrollably. Claire moved immediately, kneeling beside him with quiet composure. "Listen to my voice," she said softly. "Slow breath in. Hold it. Good. Again." The old man nodded weakly while gripping the edge of the chair. Claire placed a steady hand over his trembling wrist, checking his pulse so naturally it barely registered. Daniel's eyes narrowed. That was not restaurant training. The lead robber noticed it too. Could unlock the screen. Every light inside Le Noir flickered once, then twice. The restaurant dropped into darkness for half a second before the emergency lights activated in dim red strips across the ceiling. Gasps spread instantly through the room. Claire did not react. She already knew exactly what the darkness meant. Someone had just entered the service corridor behind the kitchen, and judging by the sudden change in the robbers' faces, it was not part of their plan. The red emergency lights painted Le Noir in shadows that no longer looked elegant. The restaurant felt smaller now, tighter. Every reflection along the marble walls seemed nervous. One of the women near the fireplace began quietly crying while her husband held her hand beneath the tablecloth. Nobody touched their food anymore. Nobody even looked at the chandeliers overhead. All eyes stayed fixed on the three armed men and the silent waitress moving carefully between terrified strangers like she belonged inside the chaos. Claire Whitmore slowly turned toward the dark kitchen corridor while thunder rolled outside the building again. She heard it before anyone else did. Footsteps. Slow. Controlled. Not police. The lead robber heard them too. His head snapped toward the hallway instantly. "Who was back there?" he barked. "Changed." Began. Claire Whitmore looked genuinely unsettled. For a moment, the entire restaurant forgot to breathe. The younger robber stared at Claire Whitmore beneath the dim red emergency lights like he had just seen a ghost step out of the past. Rain crawled down the windows behind him while distant sirens echoed somewhere far below the skyscraper. "No," he whispered again. "It cannot be you." Claire remained perfectly still beside the bar, one hand resting lightly against the polished counter. But Daniel Mercer noticed the small detail nobody else did. Her eyes shifted once toward the exits. Calculating. Adjusting. Preparing. The lead robber frowned. "What are you talking about?" The younger man did not answer immediately. He kept staring at Claire with growing disbelief. "I saw her picture before," he muttered. "Years ago." Several guests looked nervously between them now. The silence spreading across Le Noir felt colder than the storm outside. Claire finally spoke, her voice low and controlled. "You are mistaken." "No." The younger robber shook his head slowly. "Claire Holt." The name landed heavily in the room. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Claire's face changed only slightly, but it was enough. Enough to confirm something buried beneath the calm waitress routine she had worn all evening like armor. One of the terrified guests whispered softly, "Who is Claire Holt?" Nobody answered. The younger robber took another careful step forward. "My brother served overseas," he said quietly. He used to talk about a medic who pulled people out of impossible situations. Claire looked away for the first time all night. "That was a long time ago. You disappeared after the embassy attack." Daniel watched her closely now. Every piece of the puzzle inside his mind began rearranging itself. The calm under pressure. The medical instincts. The way she tracked threats before they moved. She was not simply observant. She was trained. The lead robber suddenly grabbed the younger man's arm. Enough talking. But the younger robber could not stop staring at Claire. "You saved 30 people that day," he said softly. "Why are you working here?" Claire's expression hardened slightly. "Beneath the emergency lights." "Because people leave war zones," she answered. "Even when the war does not leave them." The words settled quietly over the room. No dramatic speech. No pride. Just exhaustion hidden beneath years of silence. Daniel felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Respect. Genuine respect. For years he had surrounded himself with powerful people who announced their importance before entering a room. Claire Whitmore had hidden hers beneath a black waitress uniform and a polite smile. Near the kitchen, one of the staff members suddenly began crying harder as panic returned to the room. Claire moved toward her instinctively. "Look at me," she whispered gently while kneeling beside the shaking young woman. "You are safe right now. Stay with me." The younger robber lowered his weapon slightly without realizing it. Daniel noticed that too. Claire was changing the room itself. Slowing fear. Disrupting control. The lead robber realized it seconds later. His face darkened instantly. "Enough." He pointed sharply toward Claire. "You sit down. Now." Claire slowly stood again. Calm. Silent. But Daniel noticed something else. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the service corridor near the kitchen. Someone was still back there. And whatever Claire had just realized from those hidden movements made her suddenly look far more concerned than the armed men standing in front of her. Then the sound came. 3 soft knocks behind the kitchen wall. Not random. Rhythmic. Claire's face went pale. For the first time all night, she looked afraid. The 3 knocks echoed again from behind the kitchen wall. Slow. Precise. Deliberate. Claire Whitmore's breathing stopped for half a second. Daniel Mercer saw it immediately. After an entire night of impossible calm, the waitress who had steadied everyone else suddenly looked shaken. The lead robber noticed too. What was that? He demanded sharply. Nobody answered. Rain hammered against the windows while the red emergency lights flickered softly above the silent dining room. Somewhere near the back of Le Noir, metal clanged quietly in the dark service corridor. Claire lowered her eyes toward the floor for one brief moment, and Daniel understood something terrifying. She recognized the signal. The younger robber stared at her carefully now. You know who is back there? Claire did not respond immediately. Her expression had gone distant somehow, like she was hearing something far beyond the restaurant walls. Then another sound drifted through the kitchen corridor. A short whistle. 2 notes. Soft. Almost invisible beneath the storm. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Daniel leaned forward without realizing it. Claire, he said quietly for the first time all night. She looked at him instantly. There it was again. That strange awareness between them. Daniel did not know her story yet, but he suddenly knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever waited behind that wall frightened Claire more than the robbery itself. The lead robber grabbed her arm sharply. Talk. Claire slowly looked toward him. You need to leave. The room fell silent again. Even the younger robber looked confused. What? This is no longer your operation, Claire whispered. The lead robber's jaw tightened. Who is back there? Claire glanced once toward the dark hallway. Someone worse than you. A nervous shift spread through the robbers instantly. Daniel watched their confidence crack for the first time. Not because of police. Because of fear. The younger robber swallowed hard. You were talking about the ghost team, are you? Claire said nothing. That silence answered enough. Near the fireplace, several guests exchanged frightened looks, completely lost now. Daniel's attorney leaned closer to him and whispered, What the hell is happening? Daniel could not answer because he no longer understood the room either. Claire Whitmore was not simply a former medic. She belonged to something far larger. Something dangerous enough to terrify armed men. The lead robber suddenly released her arm and stepped backward. No, he muttered. They do not exist anymore. Claire finally looked directly at him. That is what we hoped. The words sent a visible chill through the younger robber. Then the kitchen door slowly creaked open by itself. Every person inside Le Noir froze. A single figure stepped partially into the dim red light. Tall, broad shoulders, black raincoat soaked from the storm outside. His face remained hidden beneath shadow, but his posture carried the same controlled stillness Claire had shown all night. Calm, disciplined, dangerous. The mysterious man looked first at Claire. Not surprised, not emotional, just focused. Holt, he said quietly. Claire's face drained of color completely now. Daniel had never seen anyone look at her with authority before. Until this moment. You were not supposed to be here, Claire whispered. The man removed a black glove slowly while thunder rolled across Manhattan again. Neither were they. His eyes shifted toward the robbers. Instantly, the younger robber backed away in panic. No, he breathed. No, no, no. The lead robber raised his weapon slightly with trembling hands for the first time all night. And standing in the center of the shattered restaurant beneath flickering emergency lights, Daniel Mercer finally realized the robbery had never been the real danger. The man standing in the kitchen doorway did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Fear moved through the room the second he appeared beneath the dim red emergency lights. Rainwater dripped slowly from the edge of his black coat onto the marble floor while thunder rolled somewhere over Manhattan. The younger robber looked ready to collapse. This is impossible, he whispered again. They shut your unit down years ago. The stranger ignored him completely. His attention stayed fixed on Claire Whitmore. You disappeared, he said quietly. Claire's throat tightened slightly. Daniel Mercer saw it from across the room. Every other emotion Claire had hidden all night remained buried beneath her calm expression. But this man unsettled her in ways the armed robbers never could. I left, Claire answered softly. There is a difference. The stranger stepped fully into the restaurant now. Mid-40s maybe. Military posture. Controlled movements. A face marked not by anger, but exhaustion. The kind carried by people who had seen too much and survived anyway. Several guests lowered their eyes instinctively as he passed them. Power did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it entered a room quietly, and everyone felt it anyway. The lead robber forced himself to speak. Who are you? The man finally looked toward him. Someone trying to stop this from becoming worse. The younger robber shook his head rapidly. We should leave. Nobody is leaving. The leader snapped, though uncertainty had already entered his voice. Claire slowly moved one step forward. Listen to him. Daniel noticed how carefully she chose her words now. Not fearful. Protective. If you stay here, Claire continued softly, people are going to get hurt. The stranger's eyes shifted toward her, still trying to save everyone. Claire looked away briefly. Someone should. Silence settled heavily across Lunewar once more. Then Daniel spoke for the first time since the mysterious man arrived. I assume this has something to do with me. The stranger turned toward him slowly. You are Daniel Mercer. You already know that. Yes. The man's expression darkened slightly. That is the problem. Daniel straightened in his chair. Explain. But before the stranger could answer, one of the older guests near the fireplace suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed back against the booth with a sharp gasp. Panic spread instantly again. Claire moved before anyone else even reacted. She dropped beside the man immediately, fingers checking his pulse with practiced speed. He is having a cardiac episode, she said calmly. I need space. Nobody argued. Even the robbers stepped backward instinctively, while Claire loosened the man's tie and steadied his breathing with low, controlled instructions. Stay with me, she whispered gently. Slow breath in. That is it. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. The room had fallen apart around her, yet Claire remained the calmest person inside it. The stranger watched too, and for the first time since entering the restaurant, something softened slightly in his eyes. You did not lose it after all, he murmured quietly. Claire ignored him. There is emergency nitroglycerin in the manager's office, she said without looking up. Second drawer on the left. One of the servers froze nervously. I cannot go back there. The hallway behind the kitchen still sat in darkness. Still unknown. Claire looked up slowly. I will go. Daniel immediately stood. No, every eye turned toward him now. Daniel surprised himself as much as everyone else. For years he had protected assets, companies, reputations. Not people, especially not strangers. But something about Claire Whitmore had changed that in under an hour. You are not walking into that corridor alone, he said firmly. Claire stared at him for a moment beneath the flickering lights. Then somewhere deep in the service hallway, another set of footsteps echoed slowly toward them from the darkness. The footsteps in the dark hallway were slow, measured, not hiding anymore. Every person inside Lenoir turned toward the service corridor while rain battered the skyscraper windows hard enough to sound like distant static. Claire Whitmore slowly rose from beside the older man having chest pains, her fingers still steady despite the fear finally visible behind her eyes. Daniel Mercer stood beside her now without fully understanding why. He only knew one thing. Whatever was coming through that hallway had transformed a controlled robbery into something far more dangerous. The mysterious man in the black coat shifted slightly near the kitchen entrance. Calm. Waiting. How many? Claire asked quietly without looking at him. 2, he answered. Her jaw tightened. The younger robber cursed softly under his breath. We need to leave right now. The lead robber snapped back. Nobody moves. But his confidence was gone now. Daniel could hear it breaking apart beneath the surface. The footsteps grew louder. Then 2 figures emerged slowly from the darkness beyond the kitchen. Both wore dark rain jackets. Both moved with the same silent discipline as the man already standing in the restaurant. No rushed motion. No panic. One of them glanced briefly toward Claire and gave the smallest nod. Halt. Claire closed her eyes for a moment like someone trying to bury an old life before it resurfaced completely. Daniel looked between them carefully. Who are these people? Nobody answered immediately. The guests sat frozen beneath the dim emergency lights while thunder rolled across Manhattan again. Then the first man finally spoke. Years ago, he said quietly, certain government units handled situations that could not become public. Daniel frowned. You were military. Not exactly. The answer somehow felt worse. Claire stepped forward before the conversation could continue. This is not the place for this. It became the place the second Mercer walked in. Another man replied. Daniel felt the room shift again. Every thread of danger pointed back toward him now. What does that mean? He asked sharply. Claire looked at him carefully. For the first time since they met, her composure seemed fragile. 3 months ago your company acquired Helix Systems, she said softly. Daniel nodded slowly. A cybersecurity contractor. No, the black-coated man corrected. A cover. Silence crashed over the room. Even the robbers looked confused now. Claire lowered her voice. Helix stored classified identities from covert operations overseas. Daniel stared at her. And the stranger's eyes hardened. And someone believes you still have access to those files. Daniel's stomach tightened instantly. Suddenly the robbery made sense. The tablet. The forced transfer request. None of it mattered. This was never about money. One of the younger guests near the fireplace whispered shakily, "What kind of files?" Nobody answered him. They did not need to. The fear inside the restaurant had already changed shape. Claire turned toward the older man, still struggling to breathe in the booth. "The medication," she said quietly. "We are losing time." Daniel immediately stepped forward again. "Tell me where it is." Claire hesitated. "Second office past the service corridor." "I will go." "No," she answered instantly. "You are the target." Before Daniel could respond, the lead robber suddenly laughed bitterly from across the room. The sound startled everyone. "So that is it," he muttered. "We walked into a suicide mission over computer files." One of the black-coated men looked at him coldly. "You walked into something much older than that." The younger robber slowly lowered himself into a chair, pale and shaking now. "I knew this felt wrong." Claire looked toward Daniel again. "Listen to me carefully. If those files are real, then every person in this restaurant is now connected to something dangerous." Daniel's voice dropped lower. "And you?" Claire swallowed once before answering. "I am already connected." Then suddenly every emergency light inside Le Noir went dark at once. Darkness swallowed Le Noir completely. Gasps spread across the restaurant while thunder cracked somewhere above Manhattan, shaking the massive windows hard enough to rattle the glassware still sitting abandoned across white tablecloths. For one terrifying second, nobody moved. Then Claire Whitmore's voice cut softly through the darkness. "Everybody stay low and stay quiet. Calm. Steady. Immediate." The panic slowed almost instantly. Daniel Mercer stood frozen beside her, barely able to see more than outlines beneath the storm flashes outside. Somewhere near the kitchen entrance, one of the black-coated men spoke quietly into a hidden radio. Backup power failed. "No," Claire answered from the darkness. It was shut down manually. Silence followed that realization. The lead robber cursed under his breath. "Who else is in this building?" Another lightning flash briefly illuminated the restaurant in pale silver. Daniel saw Claire standing perfectly still beside the frightened guests, her eyes fixed toward the service corridor like she could already see danger moving inside it. Then the emergency lights flickered weakly back to life. Red shadows returned across the dining room. But something had changed. One of the black-coated men was gone. Claire noticed first. "Where is Mason?" she asked sharply. The remaining operative looked toward the hallway instantly. "He went to secure the server room." Claire's expression hardened with real alarm now. "Alone?" Before anyone could answer, a loud metallic crash echoed somewhere deep behind the kitchen. Several guests screamed. The younger robber nearly dropped to the floor in panic. Daniel stared at Claire. "What is in that server room?" Claire hesitated. Then she looked directly at him. "Names." "What kind of names?" "People who disappeared so other people could sleep safely at night." The room fell silent again except for the storm outside. Daniel slowly understood the weight behind her words. Covert agents. Witnesses. Operatives buried beneath fake identities. Lives hidden inside encrypted files powerful enough to start wars if exposed. And somehow, through a corporate acquisition he barely remembered approving, those secrets had landed inside his company. The black-coated operative suddenly touched his earpiece. His face changed instantly. "Mason is down," he whispered. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Pain crossed her face like an old scar reopening. Daniel stepped closer to her. "Tell me what you need." Claire looked at him carefully beneath the flickering red light. The billionaire who once treated waitresses like invisible background noise was now standing beside her without hesitation. Not because she frightened him, Because he trusted her. I need everyone calm, Claire said softly. Fear is what gets people hurt. Then she turned toward the terrified guests still trapped inside Le Noir. Some were crying quietly. Others sat frozen in shock. Claire moved between them slowly, speaking with the same calm steadiness she had carried all night. Look at me, she whispered to a frightened woman clutching her husband's hand. You are going home tonight. Somehow people believed her. Daniel watched it happen table by table. The room stabilized around her voice alone. Not because she promised safety, because she became it. Near the shattered bar, the younger robber slowly removed his mask with trembling hands. He looked barely 23 now. Just a terrified young man caught inside something far beyond his understanding. We were told this was about money, he whispered. Claire looked toward him gently. Most dangerous things are never about money. Outside, police lights finally flooded the skyscraper windows in waves of blue and red beneath the storm. Sirens grew louder. Closer. The nightmare was ending. But Daniel somehow knew the story behind Claire Whitmore was only beginning. 1 month later, newspapers called it the robbery at Le Noir. Reporters praised Daniel Mercer for protecting guests during the crisis. They mentioned an unnamed waitress only briefly. Claire refused every interview, refused every reward, refused even the private security team Daniel offered her afterward. And yet every Thursday night, Daniel still returned to Le Noir alone. Same table by the window, same quiet rain beyond the glass. Claire always brought his coffee without asking. No speeches, no dramatic smiles, just silence filled with mutual understanding. One evening Daniel finally looked at her and asked softly, "After everything you survived, why become a waitress?" Claire glanced toward the storm outside before answering. "Because sometimes," she said quietly, "the people who save lives are the ones nobody notices."